Courtroom number 3 was permeated with the scent of old dust, fear, and unfulfilled hopes. The wooden panels had darkened with age, and the heavy velvet curtains, once burgundy but now faded to a dull brick color, absorbed what little daylight there was, creating an atmosphere of suffocating solemnity. An invisible yet palpable weight hung in the air, as if every word spoken there settled on the walls, seeping into their porous structure. On the defendant's bench, at the very heart of this suffocating drama, sat Elijah Jones, a young black man in his mid-20s. His clothes, though clean, were clearly not new and seemed too loose on his emaciated frame. His eyes, usually lively and full of humor, were now dim, reflecting a resigned weariness that came after many days and nights spent awaiting the inevitable. His hands rested on his knees, clenched into fists, betraying the nervous tension he so diligently tried to conceal. He was accused of assaulting a white man, the owner of a small shop in a respectable part of town, a crime that, in this city at this time, carried far more weight than a mere act of violence. The prosecutor, Mr. Thompson, was a man with a cold, calculating gaze and a flawlessly tailored suit. His hair was neatly slicked back, and his movements were precise and economical. He paced the courtroom like a predator, sweeping the jury with a gaze full of righteous indignation, yet without a single superfluous emotion that might betray his true intentions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice low, deep, and convincing, "we are dealing not merely with an act of violence, but with an act of aggression fueled by reckless disregard for law and order, for the safety of our streets and our families. The defendant, Elijah Jones, did not merely assault Mr. Harrison, a respected member of our community who has toiled his entire life to build his small business, his dream. He did so with a brutality that speaks of deeply rooted malice, of uncontrolled rage that poses a threat to all of us." Thompson, without raising his voice but carefully choosing his words, began to paint a picture that seemed ripped directly from the nightmares of many present. He spoke of dark streets where lawlessness reigns, of young men with no future who prefer violence to honest labor, of a growing threat to peaceful citizens who simply want to live their lives in safety. He never once uttered the word black, yet every juror seemed to hear it echo in every sentence, in every carefully chosen word. He described Elijah not as a man, but as an archetype, menacing, unpredictable, alien, like a shadow crawling out of the city's darkest corners. Mr. Harrison, a respected member of our community, was simply a victim. He did not provoke. He did not seek trouble. He merely happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when this. Thompson paused, his gaze lingering on Elijah. Individual decided to unleash his fury on an innocent man. Mr. Harrison, with his graying hair and calloused hands, was a symbol of hard work and decency, and he was brutally beaten. During questioning, Mr. Harrison, a man in his 60s, with trembling hands and tears in his eyes, spoke of the incident. His voice broke as he described the blow that he claimed came out of nowhere and the subsequent strikes. He pointed at Elijah, his finger trembling. "He was like an animal," Mr. Harrison exclaimed, his voice rising to a shout. His eyes, they were full of hatred. "I've never seen such hatred." He recounted his injuries, a broken nose, torn clothes, and how he feared for his life. He was convincing in his pain and fear, and his words seemed to penetrate deep into the hearts of the jurors. At this moment, Sarah Jenkins, Elijah's young but determined lawyer, felt a wave of prejudice building, like an invisible tsunami threatening to engulf her client. She saw how some jurors, especially elderly white women, flinched and turned their gazes away from Elijah, as if he truly were a wild animal capable of any brutality. They didn't see a man. They saw the beast created by the prosecutor's words and the witness's fear. When it was Sarah's turn, she tried to bring the proceedings back to facts, to logic, to common sense. She pointed out inconsistencies in Harrison's testimony, the absence of other witnesses, and the fact that Elijah himself had sustained injuries, a bruise on his cheek, a cut lip, which could indicate a struggle rather than a one-sided assault. She presented medical reports confirming Elijah's injuries, but this seemed merely a minor impediment in the torrent of accusation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice trembling with indignation and despair, "we have heard much about fear, about prejudice, about what is easily interpreted, but very little about the truth, about the real circumstances of that evening. My client, Elijah Jones, is not an animal. He is a man. He was provoked. He was defending himself. He is not the embodiment of your fears. He is a victim of circumstance and slander. He is a victim of racial slurs that led to this altercation." She explained that Elijah was walking home after a long day at work, stopped at the store for milk, and for no apparent reason, Mr. Harrison began to insult him, using racial epithets: "black trash, parasite, you don't belong here." She recounted how Elijah tried to leave, how Harrison pushed him, and then, when Elijah pushed him back, Harrison stumbled and fell. It was an accident provoked by Harrison's aggression and racism, not a malicious assault. But her words seemed to crash against an invisible wall. She saw some jurors nod when Thompson spoke and frown when she did. They had already made up their minds, long before they entered this courtroom. Elijah himself testified. He spoke quietly but sincerely, his voice almost a whisper, yet every word was imbued with pain and truth. He recounted walking home after a day's work on a construction site, tired but satisfied that he had earned enough for food. He went into the store for milk, and how Mr. Harrison, for no apparent reason, began to insult him. "I just wanted to leave, Your Honor," Elijah said, his voice trembling as he recalled the humiliation. "I told him to leave me alone. I didn't want any trouble. But he wouldn't stop. He started pushing me, calling me names. And then I just pushed him away. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted him to stop. He fell, and I immediately left. I was scared." But his words seemed only to confirm the image of an aggressive black man in the jurors' eyes. His calmness was perceived as coldness, his attempts to explain as excuses, his sincerity as naivety or even deceit. Prosecutor Thompson, during cross-examination, masterfully used Elijah's every word against him. "You claim that Mr. Harrison, an elderly, respected citizen, began to insult you, a young, strong man, without reason?" he asked, his voice full of sarcasm. "And you, instead of simply leaving, decided to use force? You admit you pushed him? You admit he fell?" Every answer Elijah gave, even if it was the truth, sounded like an admission of guilt under Thompson's pressure. A witness for the prosecution, Harrison's neighbor, Mrs. Dawson, testified that she saw Elijah running out of the store while Harrison lay on the floor. She had not witnessed the beginning of the conflict, but her words supported Harrison's version that Elijah was the aggressor. Sarah tried to dispute her testimony, pointing out that she had only seen a portion of the events, but the jurors seemed to have already formed their picture. The judge, an elderly man with a weary face, summarized the case, reminding the jury to base their decision on evidence, not prejudice. But he spoke these words monotonously, as if out of habit, his gaze sweeping over Elijah without any expression, as if he had seen hundreds of such cases before and the outcome was predetermined. When the jury retired for deliberation, a heavy silence hung in the courtroom. Elijah sat motionless, his gaze fixed on nothing. Sarah took his hand. His palm was cold and clammy. "We did all we could, Elijah," she whispered, trying to infuse her voice with a confidence she didn't feel. "We presented the truth. Now, all we can do is wait." A few hours later, the jury returned. Their faces were serious, yet showed no trace of doubt or struggle. They looked as if they had completed an unpleasant but necessary task. The jury foreman, a white man in his mid-40s, stood up. "We have reached a unanimous decision, Your Honor." Elijah's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Sarah, then at the jurors. In their eyes, he saw neither understanding nor compassion, only an alienation that was worse than open hatred. It was an indifference to his truth, to his humanity. On the charge of assault with bodily harm, we find the defendant, Elijah Jones, guilty. The words fell like a hammer, shattering the last fragments of hope. Elijah closed his eyes, his shoulders slumped. Sarah felt her heart clench with pain and fury. They had lost. Not because the evidence was scarce, but because the invisible chains of prejudice proved stronger than any truth, stronger than logic, stronger than justice. As Elijah was led away, he turned and looked at Sarah. There was no reproach in his eyes, only a deep, bottomless sorrow. The sorrow of a man who knew he was judged not for his actions, but for the color of his skin in a courtroom where justice was blind not from impartiality, but from deeply ingrained prejudice. The doors closed behind him, leaving Sarah alone in a silence that seemed louder than any scream.